Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition and we turn now to poem 502. At least to pray is left. This repetition of this phrase is left will already forecast for us a certain kind of desperation in this poem. Emily, the great poet of anguish, she knows how to capture in just a few words what all of us have felt. In that regards, this is another theodicy, the question, of course, of why must there be pain and suffering in this world? We go back now to poem 376. You'll maybe remember this one. Of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, give me my reason, life I had not had, but for yourself 'twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and not and gay and numb, than this smart misery. Or do you guys remember when we did 193? I shall know why when time is over and I have ceased to wonder why. Christ will explain each separate anguish in the fair schoolroom of the sky. He will tell me what Peter promised, and I, for wonder at his woe, I shall forget the drop of anguish that scalds me now. That scalds me now. That repetition of that scalds me now is very similar to this is left of this poem. The great scholar Sewell has said this. He wonders whether this poem refers to Emily's fear that a draft might involve her brother Austin in the American Civil War. For Henry Ward Beecher, in a speech at Amherst College in the year of this poem, had described the Civil War as, quote, the storm in the north and the earthquake in the south. Our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side. Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you work through a set of introductory comments where we talk about our big five. What does each of these poems have to say about epistemology, what you can know, ontology, who you are, psychology, study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the group or collective mind, and then finally, theodicy, the question of pain and suffering. And in this regards, I think Emily is very much channeling the great classic book of theodicy of the Hebrew Bible, the book of Job, and we'll have more to say about this. No question, this poem will be able to be set within the context of the previous 501 poems. We just finished with 501, The World Is Not Conclusion. This is many call it a cry of despair. It is a poem that can be read easily as a prayer. And Emily, again, dancing with the Sermon on the Mount, and especially Matthew 7, 7 and 8, knock and it shall be opened, seek and you shall find. She says it this way. At least to pray is left. Oh, Jesus in the air, I know not which thy chamber is, I'm knocking everywhere. Thou settest earthquake in the south and maelstrom in the sea. Say, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, hast thou no arm for me? Now, again, the rhetorical question at the conclusion of this poem is compelling. And of course, Emily playing with that famous story where Peter is drowning and Christ, of course, reaches as he walks on the water and he will bring Peter out of the water. Notice, first we'll begin with at least. 10 times in 10 different poems, Emily will play this game of at least to pray. Notice all these dashes. It gives that sense of desperation. At least, dash. To pray, dash. Is left, dash. Is left, dash. By the way, Emily mentions prayer or praying in 39 of her poems. It's on her mind. And then the prayer itself happens, right? Oh, Jesus, referenced in 17 different poems. Of course, we're going to get to Jesus of Nazareth at the end of this poem. Oh, Jesus in the air. Now, this in the air is fascinating because, of course, she can be referencing heaven. Or she can be talking about air as in nowhere, if you will, right? So, oh, Jesus in the air. I know not which thy chamber is. Now this I know not will take us, of course, to Christ on the cross. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. You'll remember in poem 45, it's I do not understand. And in poem 318, it was I know not. No, I know not which thy chamber is. And then the I'm knocking everywhere, which again takes us to the Matthew 7, 7, 8. Knock and it shall be open. In other words, there's the suggestion that if only one would pray, one will be given an answer. And she's like, I can't find an answer. And then she will use the pronoun thou. Settest earthquake in the south. This will remind us again of Job 9 verse 6. And maelstrom in the sea. This will take us back to poem 414. And when we get to poem 721 and 761, we'll play similar kinds of games here. The power of God is understood as earthquake and maelstrom in the sea. And then very direct, say, as in almost a demand. We call our series Chats with Emily, right? And our hope is that you have been following our series at learnstrong.net. Again, Chats with Emily, our playlist. Say, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, the only time Nazareth gets mentioned in all our poetry is right here. Hast thou no arm for me? Now, readers of Emily's stuff would know from their study of the King James Bible that Emily is referencing here the Isaiah 59:1 passage, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save. Of course, the question here is, what about me? You'll notice the last word of the poem is me with that question. What are we going to do with a poem like this at 2a? I think the argument here is it's hard when you're in the middle of pain to understand what the value of that pain or suffering is. Emily, as we have said, her theodicy seems to be, don't ask why did this happen to me, but rather why did this happen for me. There's got to be something instructional, propedeutic, didactic, instructional about the pain or the suffering. But notice here, she can't seem to quite figure out what that might be, and she's asking for help. At 2b, one scholar has said it this way in terms of this poem. Dickinson's communicates terror by radical compression of imagery and by techniques of spatial disorientation. It's a brilliant way to say it, and I think this repetition is a classic example of it. At 3a, I can't help but think of the book of Job, and of course of Job's suffering, his longing to have an answer, and finally, of course, that answer comes in the famous whirlwind and all, and the conversation to follow, right? Finally, to own a poem like this at 3b, how do you deal with pain and suffering? How do you ever get around to asking, why did this happen for me, as opposed to me? Thank you.